Welcome into One-on-One Nightly. I am Andrew Galata alongside Jackson Heil. Kelly Bright will also join us a little bit later on as well. We'll be with you on Twitter and YouTube on this Wednesday night. If you have a reaction to what we are saying or an opinion of your own, be sure to comment down below as well. And Jackson, it's great to be with you tonight, as this is really one of my favorite times of year sports-wise. The NFL's in full swing. We got the World Series. Big Ten football is coming back. The NBA coaching carousel is turning. Should definitely be a fun show.
Sure, should be as well, Andrew. Great to be with you as well. And listen, I was about to go with the no hat look tonight. It's almost become like a lifestyle for me and attached, but I was claimed that I was bad luck if I didn't wear the hat. So we had to throw it on. We're rolling with it again. And listen, we're rolling with you for the next hour plus. We'll see how long we end up going, but I'm excited for it. And like you mentioned, great time of year and a lot to get to.
Yeah, it definitely should be a really fun show, jam-packed. We'll talk about the World Series. We'll be talking about the NFL. Tua Tagovailoa, he's going to be getting his first start for the Dolphins, which is definitely really interesting. We'll talk some college football and then also the NBA coaching carousel. So that should all definitely be very, very fun. But starting off with the World Series, and before we get into this Rays-Dodgers series, I want to take a quick look back on these Game 7s of the LCS series here. So first with Rays-Astros, Rays obviously win it 4-2. Charlie Morton pitched to me a gem, 5+ innings, no earned runs. Randy Arozarena, Mike Zunino both hit home runs. And Jackson, I mean, Houston comes back from 3-0, has all the momentum. I mean, almost looked like the Astros were starting to steal signs again. And the Rays were able to stop all the momentum, play really to their formula that has worked all year. Great starting pitching, timely home runs, and a solid bullpen effort for them.
I was stunned in Game 7 that Tampa was able to come back the way they did. I mean, we've only seen it one other time before where a team has pushed a 3-0 series deficit and got it to Game 7, and it was obviously the Red Sox in 04, and they ended up beating the Yankees. But I was very surprised that Tampa won this game for a few reasons, obviously. But, I mean, the amount of mental fortitude it requires to overcome blowing a 3-0 series lead, knowing that you're essentially in a coin flip at that point, that takes a lot of mental fortitude. And I think the Rays deserve a lot of credit for coming out the way they did in Game 7, pouncing on Lance McCullers early. And to be honest, I mean, a lot of this game comes down to the fact that McCullers just didn't have it early on. I thought it was pretty obvious that his fastball was running into a lot of barrels. He didn't really have a whole lot of command of his curveball. And honestly, I mean, you look at the 2 home runs that were the difference in the game. It's a 2-strike fastball to Arozarena, which I just don't understand the pitch selection there. And then a hanging curveball to Mike Zunino. So that was a difference in the game. You got to give Houston credit for coming back in the series. I was rooting for the Astros, honestly. I'm here to embrace chaos, as many have seen. And I think that, honestly, I think Houston gets a bad rap for a lot of reasons. Obviously, the whole stealing sign thing, they deserve to get criticized the way they did. But to me, I think they just did a better job cheating than everyone did. They won a World Series, and they ended up getting caught. And that's why so many people are pissed at Houston, was because they got caught, even though everyone around the league is doing this, in my opinion. So I was happy to see the Astros kind of prove everyone wrong a little bit and get back to the point where, hey, they were a few runs away from going to the World Series. So that was an incredible game, and not as good as what we saw on the NL side for sure. That was one of the best games of the year, Game 7 between the Braves and the Dodgers. But it was certainly a fun series, and certainly on both sides, you can't ask for 2 better LCSs, to be honest. Both going to Game 7, even without fans, there was still a ton of theater and a ton of drama there.
Yeah, I mean, especially you were saying without fans, like if you needed a little extra drama, having 2 Game 7s, that would definitely kind of lift the stakes and get the blood pumping, especially for both of these fans and just even casual MLB fans. Really 2 well-played games. And yeah, the Astros, as you were saying, look, they were able to kind of right everyone wrong. And I was kind of saying coming into this season with the Astros, the MLB, I would think, wants the Astros to win. And because okay, the sign stealing probably didn't matter as much as people think if they could still win and be successful. And obviously they were. So it does show that, look, they had a lot of things that this season go wrong for them. Verlander out, they had a lot of injuries, and were still able to make it to the LCS. And I know they were playing as the bad guy and the villain, But again, I thought they were able to come back from 3-0 and almost pull it off. And as you were saying, over in the NL side, you have really a classic game, and a game that the Dodgers do win 4-3 with Cody Bellinger blasting the game-winning home run in the seventh, which completed the comeback for LA. Julio Urias, he picked up the win and pitched 3 scoreless innings in this one, and that was obviously really big too. As like for the Dodgers, I was just saying how the Rays kind of had a textbook win. I would say the Dodgers kind of had the opposite. You only have your starter go 1 innings, kind of have to pick up the pieces. But that just shows how deep they are, veteran team, and look, to me, they're the team to beat.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they're the best team in baseball this year for a reason. And crazy how you got to feel for Atlanta fans, man. I mean, they just can't get anything right. But a Dodgers team that goes down 3-1 in the series, I mean, the changing point in the series was the Will Smith at bat off of Will Smith, where he hits a home run to left field to put the Dodgers in front on a 3-2 count with 2 outs. So that changed the entire series. I thought there were some questionable decisions managing wise on both sides in Game 7. Starting with the Dodgers going with Dustin May on 1 day's rest, coming off of 55 pitches, didn't make a whole lot of sense to me as the opener, which I'm for of the opener, but not using Dustin May in that position, even though he's a good matchup, he just didn't have any gas in him, unfortunately. And then on the Braves side, letting Ian Anderson pitch the 3rd inning after he labored through 2 innings, have to go the second time through the order. The Dodgers end up tying the game, and the Dodgers end up winning the game, like you said, off a Cody Bellinger home run, who, despite all his struggles this year, coming off the MVP hangover, he's just come up with big hit after big hit, including a 2-run home run to put the Dodgers on the board last night in Game 1 of the World Series. So, obviously, like we mentioned, very exciting Game 7s on both sides, and it's going to be an exciting World Series so far. I know we're going to get to Game 1 and what happened last night, with the Dodgers cruising to a Game 1 win. But I still look at this series, and with everything that happened this year in baseball, only getting 60 games, I really think we do have the 2 best teams in baseball in the World Series. And the Rays, who have become a pitching factory over the years, continue to find a way to get there and find a way to win ball games, even with a limited payroll. And then this Dodgers team that has been building for so long, they finally add arguably the best player in baseball, Mookie Betts right now, who has been such a difference maker on both sides of the ball, really in this entire postseason. And I think we're going to get a great series between these 2 sides.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a perfect way for you to put it, saying, look, we played 60 games, like what, almost a third of the season as a full, and you still got, to me, the 2 best teams. And two of the best teams that got there in completely different ways. I feel like the Rays basically, look, smallest payroll. They're able to build it basically from the ground up through that. Great pitching. And the Dodgers, obviously being known as kind of the big team, spends a lot of money. And we're here at the World Series. And look, the Game 1 definitely went towards the Dodgers' favor, and they were able to get it done. And I think that game showed a lot like, look, we got the stars, we got Kershaw, we got Betts, we got Bellinger. And for me, the Rays in this whole series, it's going to be, we're going to have to play a perfect series, because as much as you want to say the Rays are a great team and they're a great story, the Dodgers, to me, have a ton of depth, a ton of star power, and right now look like, to me, the best team in baseball, and really right now a class above the Rays right now. That's just my opinion.
I think there's a few things we have to talk about for Game 1. And one of them, I mean, Clayton Kershaw is the man. I mean, yeah. I think this is a guy who has been universally underappreciated, considering, one, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, regardless of what you think of him as a postseason pitcher. And 2, I mean, this is a guy who has legitimately been the best pitcher in baseball for the past decade. I mean, he's clearly the best pitcher of our generation. And all we seem to talk about with this guy, especially recently, is the postseason and how he just continues to not show up in big spots, which, listen, there are parts where he deserves criticism for that. I mean, you just point to last year, he comes in relief and gives up back-to-back home runs to the Nats, which turns over Game 5, and they end up losing that, and they end up losing that series. And obviously, in the World Series in 2017, Game 5, the Dodgers spot him 7 runs, and he gives up 2 3-run leads separately. So there are times where he hasn't performed in the postseason, but, I mean, look what he's done this year. I mean, first postseason start this year against the Brewers was arguably one of the best pitched baseball games I've seen this year. He strikes out 13 guys. He Probably could have gone the distance and thrown to Maddox if he really wanted to, but Dave Roberts ends up pulling him, rightfully so. Against the Padres, terrific. He gives up 2 home runs, one to Manny Machado where the ball was about 6 inches off the ground, and it was an incredible swing. And then Eric Hosmer hits one out of the park. He was still really good in that start and only gives up 2 runs over 6 innings. And against the Braves, yes, he struggled, but again, the back spasms were a problem for him. I mean, that happens. And listen, he comes out in game 1, shoves, deservingly so. He deserves a lot of credit for what he's been able to do, because this is a guy who's been under pressure for a long time. And even though he has struggled in certain spots, he's certainly performed as well. The other thing I think we need to bring up is how damn good is Mookie Betts, man. I mean, this guy just makes play after play on both sides of the ball. And I want to have the Trout Betts discussion at some point, but you look at last night, makes a few really good defensive plays, hits a home run to right field. The best thing he probably does all game is he walks to lead off the 5th inning, steals 2 bases, and ends up making an incredible base running move, getting that secondary lead at third base, and somehow scoring on a ground ball that doesn't make it out of the infield with the infield playing in already. I mean, you can't ask for much more when it comes to manufacturing runs. I mean, that honestly was really a difference in the game, because if they throw out Betts at home, maybe that ending changes for Glasnow, who knows? But this is a guy who's a difference maker on both sides of the ball. He's arguably the best player in baseball right now, and he's certainly the most impactful guy left in the postseason. And we're talking about him going up against a guy in Randy Rosarena who's been pretty damn good himself. So it's just fun to watch. And like I said, I think this is going to be a great series, but I'd be hard pressed to find a way the Dodgers lose it.
Yeah, I mean, the point that you were bringing up about Kershaw, I think, look, his postseason inconsistencies, like, to me, he's pitched over 170 innings in the postseason against the best teams, because obviously in the postseason, you're getting the best teams. I don't care how good of a pitcher you are, you're going to throw some clunkers in there just because he's played the best teams and he's played them the most amount of times, which, again, to me, he is the best pitcher of our generation. And look, the memory that I have him in the postseason as a Mets fan was when he completely dealed against the Mets in Game 4 of the NLDS back in 2015. And after that, he completely got my respect, because look, in a winner go home type game, he pitched, I think, 7 or 8 innings, no runs, and he just pitched outstanding. So look, Kershaw, I feel like he just showed why, look, he's a legendary pitcher, and he came up huge for the Dodgers yesterday. And with Mookie Betts, I mean, he's a guy that really does it all. I mean, as you were saying, I mean, it's not even just the highlights and what you're probably going to see on Twitter with the robbing the home runs and hitting the home runs, but just base running, fundamental baseball. A lot of guys, look, even if they have a ton of talent, they'll do things wrong, like make a bonehead a base running mistake or something like that. And Betts doesn't do it. And he's just a player that's going to not only make some really impactful plays for your team, but he's going to play the game the right way, which is really fun to watch for me as a baseball fan, and really kind of liking what he's doing and what the Dodgers doing. But again, I feel like in that game, I do want to talk about just one more thing. And with Glasnow, you were kind of alluding to it about Kevin Cash's decision to put him back out there in the 5th inning. As it's just interesting, because for me, Cash in that ALCS series, he was yanking starters out in the 5th inning with no problem. And now he leaves Glasnow in. Jackson, I'd love to get your opinion on this, because it just seems like it was a little questionable. Like, when I was watching this, I was like, why is Glasnow still out there?
I think you have to take a few things into account here, because let's be honest, the Rays bullpen, as good as it is, has been taxed completely in this postseason. I mean, they've had to go to a Game 5 against the Yankees. They had to go to a Game 7, obviously, against the Astros. Their big guns have been used a ton, specifically Nick Anderson, Peter Fairbanks, Diego Castillo. All those guys have been used a ton. And to me, this was a decision for Kevin Cash. You're losing 2-1 going into the 5th inning. Clayton Kershaw is shoving at the moment. You have the top of the order coming up. You never give up a game in the World Series, but this was as close to Kevin Cash giving up the game as he could. And I don't necessarily disagree with him entirely, because let's look to Game 2. And you should never look ahead, obviously, in a World Series game. But Game 2, you have a guy in Blake Snell pitching who hasn't gone past or pitched into the 7th inning this year. Mm-hmm. The max he's gone is 5 2/3. You know you're going to need the bullpen tomorrow. You know you're going to need your big guns too. And you have guys who, if they're pitching today in a game you're already losing 2-1, with the way Kershaw's pitching, you think he's going at least 7 innings and maybe giving up one more run, if that. With this Dodgers lineup, I think you were almost accepting the fact that, hey, let's try to get Glasnow through one more inning. Let's just accept defeat. And if Glasnow somehow is able to get us through one more inning in the 5th, then maybe we have a chance to win. And if we can score some runs off Kershaw, then maybe we'll change the route that we go. The thing that confused me was I didn't understand going to Ryan Yarbrough in that situation, a guy who's probably slated to start game 4, yet you use him, yes, only for 19 pitches, and he'll still probably start a game in the series or be a bulk guy after an opener. But I didn't understand going to Yarbrough there because now he's disrupted. And now you put yourself in a situation where he's not used to coming to the game in the 5th inning where he's going to be in that role. So I didn't love the decision from Cash to go to Yarbrough. That's the only thing I really question here because, listen, if you're going to survive this series, you're going to need guys to finally go 5 or 6 innings, especially when you're going to have to play 7 straight days with no days off. That's the biggest difference to me in this kind of concept. And I actually like it because I really think it separates the really good teams and the really deep teams when it comes to pitching from teams who don't belong there. And I think from a pitching perspective, obviously the Rays are in a better situation than the Dodgers, but the Rays have been taxed so much already that I think their only chance of winning the series was winning with these guys taking a day off in game 1. And listen, they didn't, but now you have everyone locked and loaded. Game 2 becomes a must win, but game 2 is going to be a must win regardless, essentially, of what happens. So I kind of respect folding his hand in that situation, keeping your chips for another day, and now going back at it with your best bet now. And they're up 1-0 in game 1, and we're expecting it to be a tight game. You're going to need those guys in Fairbanks and Anderson to probably go 2 innings in this game, especially with the way Snell has pitched in terms of pitch efficiency. So I don't hate the decision from Cash. The only thing I question is not going to one of his mop-up guys instead of going to Ryan Yarbrough there. But it's weird because, like I said, you never want to give up a game like that. But that's essentially what Cash did in this situation. And it's a decision I've kind of gone back and forth with, but I'm kind of turning on his side in this one.
Yeah, I think the one interesting thing that you were talking about is pitching depth, and especially in this concept of the playoffs where you're playing every day. I definitely understand why, look, you kind of concede. It's not really conceding because Glasnow is one of their best pitchers, and at a certain point, you got to trust your starter to go into the 5th, go into the 6th. So, like, especially in this format. So I think it was a calculated risk. It didn't go his way, but I feel like right now, as you were saying, it puts them in really good position today. You're winning 1-0, which is good. Yes, it's a must win, but I mean, again, I respect it as you were saying too. And again, we're going to see what happens in game 2 and the rest of the series. And we're going to take a quick break right now. When we get back, we're going to be joined by Kelly Bright. We're going to talk about the key players and pieces of this World Series. And then also we're going to get into our series predictions as well. So we're going to be right back. Nightly. I'm Andrew Galata alongside Jackson Heil. We're joined by Kelly Bright. as we're going to continue our discussion about the World Series. We got the Dodgers, we got the Rays. Dodgers won game one, 8-3. And now we're going to jump into the key pieces and players of this series and who are going to be the real difference makers here in this World Series. So, Kelly, I'll start with you just because you just joined the show. Who's your key player, key piece to either of these teams here that's going to make them win the series?
Yeah, so you guys already talked about him enough, and I know he's already pitched game one, but Clayton Kershaw was who I was really excited to see, especially like you guys brought up. He's had a lot of criticism when it comes to the postseason, and I'm glad he kind of, basically gave the middle finger to all the haters and proved that he belongs and that he can show up for his team in the postseason. He now has 9 postseason starts with at least 6 innings pitched and no more than 1 earned run and one walk. That's the most in MLB history. He's owning October. He's 3-1 in 4 starts this postseason with a 2.88 ERA, only 3 walks, 30 strikeouts. So he looks awesome. You might see him if they take this to a game 5, game 6, game 7. So I'd love to see him come back and keep proving his point. But another pitcher, we've been hyping up the Dodgers all night, but I'm a huge Rays girl. I know last time I was on the show, I said Rays in 7. I still believe that. And I think a huge pitcher for them is going to be Charlie Morton. He's 5-0 in his postseason start to the Rays. He's already slated to start game 3. And his last game 7 was in the American League Championship Series, obviously against the Astros. He had 5 2-3 scoreless inning. He used 66 pitches to get through that Houston lineup. They got nothing out of it. Has a .57 ERA, so I think he could be huge for the Rays. And then the Rays are already I think they already have the pitching advantage over the Dodgers, and I think he's going to be a really key piece.
I just want to add here, like on Morton, I feel like so many people forgot about him coming into this year. I mean, we forget. I mean, last year he finished 3rd in Cy Young voting after a terrific year with the Rays. He was the guy who was basically their game 1 starter in the postseason. And like you mentioned, Morton is one of the best big game pitchers in the entire league right now. I mean, go back to 2017 when he was facing the Dodgers. He closed out the World Series in game 7. He closed out the ALCS in game 7 against the Yankees. Like, this is a guy who just shows up in big spots and gets the job done. And along the lines of Kershaw as well, dude had a 1.9 ERA from 2013 to 27. That's just ridiculous. Like, where are you going to find that? And all we seem to talk about him is the disrespect that he gets because of some postseason failures, which he has had. Like, I don't think he gets a pass on that. I'm with you there. But at the same time, like Kelly mentioned, and like we've mentioned all night, this is a guy who shoves in big spots too. Like, this is a guy who's pitched really well in plenty of big games. And like we saw in game 1, he was terrific. We talked about it already too, but I want to bring up the Mookie Betts argument real quick because I've seen it all over Twitter and talking to my buddy Dave Spampanato about it too. Mookie Betts is essentially being crowned as the best player in baseball right now, which I think we need to put the brakes on a little bit there for a few reasons. And I'm not saying that he isn't terrific, because he is. I mean, there are so many reasons and so many things that he does well that it's 1A and 1B for me with him and Trout at the moment. But do we remember how good Mike Trout is? Like, can we seriously just like remember for a second how damn good Mike Trout is? And I think we would be saying a lot of the same things if we saw Mike Trout on a postseason roster. Yeah, he hasn't been there since 2014. He hasn't won a postseason game, and that largely isn't his fault because obviously he plays for an Angels organization that has just been proven incompetence over the last 6 or 7 years. But I just want to throw the tires because I think there's a lot of recency bias in terms of how people are judging Mookie Betts. And he deserves all the credit in the world because he's been the best player in this postseason by a country mile, even with what Randy Arozarena is doing. But there's a reason Mike Trout probably deserves 6 MVPs right now. I mean, we were talking last year about Mike Trout arguably being the best player in baseball history. I mean, this is a guy that does it all offensively. I think he's a better hitter than Mookie Betts. I'd give Betts the edge defensively, but his base runners are eerily similar too, with Betts probably getting a minor advantage. But Mike Trout is Mike Trout, guys. Like, let's take it easy for a second there. As good as Mookie is, we got to remember just how good Mike Trout is.
Yeah, I mean, look, right now Mike Trout is wasting away with the Angels, which really stinks, as a baseball fan, because you want to see your best player play in the biggest games, and the Angels just haven't been able to get it done. And I think that's why Betts was brought up. That's why people were talking about Tatis so much, because they're playing in the impact games. I mean, and those are the players you're seeing in the nationally televised games. And look, Trout, he's playing at 10:30 Eastern time most of the time, 10:10, whenever the games start. And no one on the East Coast is really watching him unless you're an avid baseball fan. So I feel like with that argument, I think recency bias is huge, because if you watch Mike Trout, he's hands down the best player. And I know Mookie Betts is great, and I was saying how good he is. But right now, Mike Trout, I mean, there's a reason that he gets all the MVPs, wins the batting titles, hits a ton of home runs, looks amazing in center field. And again, I think it's a real shame, really, that we don't get to see him more often. Not enough people talk about him. And again, I mean, as good as some other guys, Mookie Betts, Tatis, they're all great. But to me, hands down, Trout's the best.
Yeah, and it's not quite the same, but I almost see Trout as like a LeBron figure where he could realistically be MVP every season. He could realistically
Oh,
take
yeah.
every award home every season, but people just kind of get used to him being that good, that the standard for him is so high that no one is surprised when he plays that at that level. Now, what you said with recency bias, I think that's exactly what I would chalk up these conversations between Mookie Betts versus Mike Trout, because even if you just look at all their stats, I can't think of one category where Mookie Betts is above Trout. Even stolen bases, I'm pretty sure Mike Trout has more. So I think, yeah, Mookie Betts might have got the whole country free tacos. That's awesome. Like, we love that. That doesn't make him the greatest of all time. It doesn't even make him the greatest player this year. Now, do I think he's going to be the MVP of this World Series? Hands down. But I do think it's a little too early to have that conversation about him versus Mike Trout.
I want to be clear here too, because I think Mookie Betts is pretty clearly the second best player in baseball right now, and I do think he's close to Trout. Like I'm not, I wasn't at this point last year, but I think Mike Trout and Mookie Betts, the window has gotten really close between them. However, this was like the first year that I can really say since 2012 that this is probably the first year I wouldn't have given Mike Trout the MVP. And that should just tell you how good Mike Trout is, because there was a realistic argument that from 2012 to 2019, Mike Trout was probably the most valuable player in baseball every single year. And that's just how good Mike Trout is. And listen, we are talking right now, and he wasn't the MVP. I don't think he was the MVP this year, but I still think there's a really good argument that he deserves to be in the top three. And that's the model of consistency that Trout has provided over, like, he's a consistent top 2-3 MVP candidate for the entire first, 10 years of his career. That's insane. You just don't see that from anywhere. And I'm not saying that Mookie Betts isn't right there with Mike Trout, because he is. But until we see Mookie consistently perform like the MVP candidate that Mike Trout is every year, and Mookie's right there. Like I said, Mookie is right there. And I think he's going to be that guy over the next few years. But he isn't there yet. I need to see at least one more year of full-on consistency, because really over the last 4 years, we have seen that from Mookie. But you're talking about Mike Trout here. We're talking about a guy who has been graced as the best player in baseball since he entered the league. I need to slow it down. That's all I got to say about Mookie. Because I feel like I'm criticizing him too much here, because I do love Mookie Betts, and he's been clearly the most impactful player in the postseason. But let's just slow the roll down just a little bit.
No, yeah, completely agree. And I think that with Trout also, as you were saying, just the consistency of it, you put him in a 162 game season. I think this definitely goes a different way. I mean, not saying that Betts wouldn't be great over 162, but again, I feel like Trout just does it game in and game out with a team that's just not so good. I think a lot of people don't talk about that as well. I mean, look, to basically focus in for 162 games for 10 years and to only go to the postseason, I think once. And I mean, that's just a crazy and a master of his craft, and something that for me, I'm amazed about, because again, he's just hands down to me one of the best players. And just another player I want to highlight in this series is Randy Arozarena. I know we touched upon him very, very quickly here, but I feel like he reminds me a lot as a Mets fan of that Daniel Murphy run in 2015. Guy that kind of comes out of nowhere almost and just starts cracking home runs after home run after home run. And honestly, like, it's just to me a great story. A guy that comes out of nowhere, happens again. Obviously, as a Mets fan with Daniel Murphy, it's kind of just like getting into the heartstrings with me and bringing back some good memories. So, I mean, he's a player that I feel for the Rays, he's going to have to continue that, because the one thing with Daniel Murphy didn't continue was in the World Series. And that's a big reason why the Mets didn't win that World Series back in 2015. So I definitely want to get your guys' opinion on, do you think Arozarena will continue this in the World Series? And if he doesn't, is this doomsday for the Rays?
No, I absolutely love this kid. And he quite literally did come out of nowhere. I mean, he defected from Cuba, went to Mexico. Cardinals signed him for what, 1.2 mil. Rays traded him in the offseason, or Rays trade for him in the offseason. And anytime the Rays make a trade and it doesn't really make sense, they usually know something the other teams don't know. And I think this is a perfect example. And you have to remember, Arozarena, he had COVID for the beginning of the season. He didn't play till I think he only played in the last few weeks before the postseason. So people had no idea who this kid was. And now he's absolutely lighting it up. I mean, 7 home runs this postseason, 47 total bases. That's leading in out of any player in the postseason. So I think he's an electric player. However, it is the first time we're hearing from him. It could just be, a Mr. October scenario where he just shows up this postseason. So hopefully he turns into this player that the Rays can continue to build their team around. But it's going to be really interesting to see how he carries on next year.
He's no fluke either. Like, I'm a full believer in this kid's talent. And you look at what he does at the plate. I mean, he punishes fastballs, first of all. I mean, you throw him a fastball anywhere over the plate, and he can take it to all fields with a ton of power. And when you think you have him with a breaking ball, I mean, the guy just takes advantage of mistakes. Like, and he can hit the low breaking ball, which is so important. He gives you a cement mixer, he's going to crush it too. And that's the reason I'm really a believer in him, because he can hit velocity, he can hit the breaking stuff, and anywhere really over the plate, he's going to make you pay. And honestly, like, they called him the Cuban Mookie Betts in the ALCS. I believe it was Brian Anderson was saying that. He does remind me with his approach a lot of Mookie Betts. It's almost a combination between him and Andrew McCutchen. Those are the two guys that I see in him, where the approach is aggressive early on in counts, but he's also patient enough to wait and see his pitch. And when he doesn't make mistakes. And we've seen him do it with 2 strikes too so many times in the postseason. So I think this guy's for real. I think the fact that he's not a free agent till 2025 or 26 is really scary, because he's not a guy that the Rays are going to have to move because of money purposes. They have him cost control for the next 4 or 5 years, which is a blessing for the market that Tampa Bay is. So I don't think he's going to slow down this postseason. I mean, listen, he's got 7 home runs. So even if he does slow down, like if he hits 1 or 2, that would be considered slowing down in the World Series. But we're at a point with him where I only say this because I'm really a believer in the Dodgers pitching. I think their staff is better equipped to approach pitching to him than Houston was, just because of the craftiness of their staff. The only guy that I would really worry about as a starter against him is Walker Buehler, because as good as he is, and he is one of the best fastballs in the entire league, he's been kind of a little all over the place in terms of his ability to find the plate. So that's the only guy I would really worry about in terms of the Dodgers rotation against him. But again, we're talking about Randy Arozarena, who's punished everyone. I mean, Garrett Cole, the list goes on and on about the guys that he's hit homers off of this postseason. It's an incredible story, and I think it's only going to continue for him. And honestly, like, it wouldn't surprise me if he was an MVP candidate going to next year, because he is that good of a hitter.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. He's going to be locked up for the next 5-6 years. That's big for the Rays, and for them to build longevity, they're going to have to do it here with Arozarena. And before we wrap up our World Series talk, do you guys have any series predictions, tonight predictions? Right now, the Rays, are up 1-0. So who do you guys got in this game and in the series overall?
Well, just to add quickly, the Rays just hit a 2-run double
Okay.
out of Joey Wendell, literally as you're saying this. So 3-0 Tampa. I think this was going to be 1-1 regardless after game 2. But I still like the Dodgers in 6, possibly 7. They're lined up where whoever wins game 3, I think, is probably going to win this series. I mean, because that's really where you have the heavyweight matchup of Buehler versus Morton. Those two are both lined up for game 3. Those have been the guys who have been pitching in big spots for both these teams. But I just think this Dodgers lineup is too much. I mean, it's one of the best lineups that I've seen in baseball over the last few years in terms of its depth, in terms of where they're getting production. And unlike Houston, where Tampa really took advantage of their mistakes, this Dodger team doesn't make those type of mistakes, which is why I'm rolling with LA. I think Tampa is definitely going to make this a series. I think their pitching is good enough to certainly make this a series, but I still think that there's a reason this Dodgers team was the best team in baseball, and nothing would make me happier than to watch Clayton Kershaw close out a World Series in just dominant fashion, because if there's anyone who deserves one, it's him right now. And with what he's had to go through, I think that would just make me so happy and put a smile on my face as a Kershaw stan. So I like the Dodgers. I like them to close this up in 6. I do like Tampa tonight. I like them coming into this game, and they're taking advantage right now. They're up 3-0 in the bottom of the 4th, and Blake Snell's pitching really well right now. But I'm rolling with the Dodgers in 6.
I mean, as much as I love Kershaw and I want him to do well, I'm still going Rays in 7. And I know that might be a hot take, but I think what you said about the Rays pitching staff, I think they are talented enough to go into a deep series and come out on top. I mean, we haven't even seen their 3 best closers yet. And if you really think about it, if Victor Gonzalez doesn't catch that 106-mile line drive, we could be having a different conversation right now. So I do think the Dodgers have the advantage offensively, but I think when you get late into the season like this and you get into like game 6, game 7, whoever has a deeper bullpen, whoever has a more versatile staff, whoever's manager can get more creative, which I think Kevin Cash has the advantage in that regard as well. I think you have the advantage, especially in a World Series where anything can happen. So I'm going Rays in 7.
Andrew, before you go here, I think you brought up a really good point about the managerial matchup here, because this is one where, I mean, like, if Dave Roberts doesn't win this World Series, I mean, LA fans are going to be at his neck, honestly, because, I mean, we've seen it in the past. I mean, a lot of people want him fired after last year, after what happened, because, I mean, you could point to a lot of things, but going to Kershaw in game 5 in the bullpen was really the reason they lost that series to Washington. But I thought he managed a really good series against Atlanta, especially in the spots where it really mattered most in games 5 through 7. Kevin Cash, I'm interested to see how he handles this bullpen because of how taxed it is. That's the one thing I'm worried about with Tampa Bay and their pitching, is that they've had to use Anderson and Fairbanks and Castillo. They've had to use those guys so much that they're drained. Yeah, and I think we're really seeing it with Anderson, because I think Nick Anderson is the most underrated relief pitcher in all of baseball. And even he's given up a ton of big hits in the postseason so far, particularly Correa's walk-off home run in game 5. And he also didn't look good earlier in that series. So I'm interested to see how Cash handles that. I do think he's the better manager than Roberts for sure. But I also think Dave Roberts has more at his disposal because he hasn't had to use this bullpen as much as Kevin Cash has had to use Tampa's bullpen.
Yeah, and for me, I'm going to go Dodgers in 6, and it has a lot to do with depth. And I feel like right now the Dodgers, they got more depth. I think they're less taxed. I think their bullpen's less taxed. They're, to me, have the better stars. And to me, it just feels like they finally bust down that door and win a championship. It's almost like a matter of time. You know, you have such a talented roster, such a deep roster. It's like eventually they're going to win one. And it seems like this is going to be their year, at least for me. So that is going to wrap up our World Series talk. As again, this should be a wonderful series and I can't wait to watch. We are going to take a quick break. And after the break, we're going to get into some of the NFL, some Tua news, as he's finally going to be starting with the Dolphins. But first, we are going to take a break. Welcome back into One-on-One Nightly. I'm Andrew Galata alongside Jackson Heil. And now we're going to get into our NFL talk of the evening. And we're going to start it off with some news with the Dolphins now giving the starting quarterback job here to Tua Tagovailoa. And look, right now the Dolphins 3-3 coming into the bye week. Ryan Fitzpatrick's actually not playing too bad. They had a really nice win against San Francisco, but hey, now it's Tua's shot here. And that's something for me, which is really interesting with this whole QB class here from 2020. Obviously, have Burrow, you have Tua Tagovailoa, you have also Justin Herbert playing really good right now. And honestly, I think it's really great to see all three of them now playing. And I think at least two out of the three have pretty good rosters, with the Chargers, with Herbert, and now with Tua and the Dolphins. But Jackson, what are you thinking here with that move with Tua? And do you think it was the right move? Because a lot of people think it was really premature.
It's tough to say. Based off history in the past, I would say this is probably the right move if they think he's ready. With that said, does anyone really know if he's ready? Because when was the last time we saw Tua Tagovailoa on a football field, other than this past Sunday for basically the last 2 minutes of that game? The last time we saw him was getting carted off with a really serious hip injury when he was playing at Alabama, which sucks, by the way. That is one of the most debilitating injuries you can have, especially as a football player. I mean, this is exactly what happened to Bo Jackson. And we saw how his career changed after that. So it's tough to say, because let's talk about Ryan Fitzpatrick for a second. He's been terrific. There's no other way to put it. I mean, back-to-back really dominant performances. Yes, one of them was against the Jets, but beat a really good 49ers defense. And I mean a really good 49ers defense. And yes, that's a 49ers defense that's missing Bosa, but this is a really good defense that he shredded apart. And he's got the 7th highest QBR in the entire league right now. That's not a guy I usually go away to, but what I think back to here, and I think of history when I think of this, is when the Chiefs traded Alex Smith and went to Patrick Mahomes. And obviously, I think a lot of people were in the same boat that probably are in the same boat here that thought Fitzpatrick should have kept the starting job, because Alex Smith was fine. Alex Smith did a great job in Andy Reid's system. And even though Alex Smith was a safe quarterback, you had a guy behind him in Patrick Mahomes, who is obviously now the best quarterback in the NFL, maybe the most talented quarterback in NFL history, if we're being quite honest. And even though a lot of people thought that was the wrong move potentially at the time, it ended up being the right move. And maybe, honestly, they were too late to go to him in that field, because they ended up going to the postseason in Mahomes' rookie year and ended up losing to Tennessee at home somehow. So I think that as much as I love Ryan Fitzpatrick, and he's arguably my favorite quarterback in NFL history as a Jet fan, because he is solely responsible for the best quarterback season in the history of the New York Jets. As much as I love him, if Tua's ready, Tua's the guy, and you go to Tua now. So that's where I'm at. I can't say if he's ready for sure, but if he is ready, you don't waste time going to him, because he is the future of this franchise. There's no doubt about it. And even as good as Fitzmagic has been, if Tua is ready, you have to go to him now.
Yeah, I mean, I think really this reminds you of the Mahomes situation. It reminds me of when Eli back in the day got his starting job for the Giants. Yeah. I mean, I think there was just a few tweets about it with Kurt Warner saying, like, look, how to let the young guy play, because it's about the future. And really right now, what the Dolphins have done with Brian Flores, I think that's a great hire. And I think they're really trending in the right direction. And as much as, look, you were saying Fitzpatrick, your love affair with the Jets, I mean, I think a lot of people love him. He's playing really good football right now. But to me, with him at a certain point, he's going to start to dip. And he's going to have that bad game where, like, oh, Fitzpatrick had his day. It's like Fitzmagic or Fitztragic. And look, he had both of those days. And right now, look, the Dolphins are 3-3. They're kind of riding a hot streak here. It's the bye week, which I think is the biggest thing here to bring in Tua, because again, it's something that, look, you at least now have a week to run over the game plan with him, and you can implement some new stuff if needed. And again, I feel like really the whole the Dolphins organization, I think they're really moving in the right direction. And I think putting in Tua now, he must be ready, because I feel like they put a really good foundation around him, good head coach. They went out in free agency, got a really good players around him. And now it's like, it's time to go with Tua. So I really feel like that was a good move.
And here's where I'm at with Fitzpatrick too, because I didn't honestly. He came out with the comments today, which was really interesting. I mean, there were some interesting comments, basically talking about there's no other person like this where you essentially get fired, yet in the same day you have to sit in 4-hour Zoom meetings with the boss that fired you and the guy that's also replacing you. Which has to be tough. I mean, I don't care how much of a veteran you are. That has to be a really difficult situation for any quarterback. And even a guy like Ryan Fitzpatrick, who has been essentially everywhere, has been in situations similar to this before, it's got to be frustrating too. And I don't blame him for letting out his emotions, even as a veteran, because I think, honestly, he's got a right to be pretty upset because he has played really well. And he has – honestly, he probably deserved another week as a starting quarterback. With this all said, though, he is kind of playing it twofold here, because if you go back to when the Dolphins first drafted Tua, Ryan Fitzpatrick said, whenever he's ready, I'm going to be the biggest cheerleader there is. So if he's going to make comments like that, and when this happens, going public the way he did and making those comments, I don't think it's the best look for Fitzpatrick. And I get it. It's frustrating. To have to go through that must suck. And honestly, I made this analogy before the show, but I compared it to like someone being in a relationship with someone that's good and good enough for now, but you meet someone else that you may think, hey, this might be a better situation for me. And you end up leaving the person who was good in the first place. So that's it. It might be a crazy analogy, honestly, but I think it's honestly a very similar situation.
I mean, it works.
That is. It does work. Yeah, it works. We're going to call it that. Thank you, Andrew. But I was looking for some validation there and someone to step in, and I realized you were the only one who really could there. But yeah, no, like that's where I'm at. And it's got to be really frustrating. And behind closed doors, do whatever you want. But in the public, you got to put on a smile face and say, hey, I'm here for Tua. I'm going to support him in any way possible. And even as frustrating as it must be for him, I didn't love the direction he chose to go with the comments. And I don't think it was anything malicious, but I still think it could have been handled better.
Yeah, I mean, he must have known going into the Dolphins job, though, that they were going to get a young QB. It was going to be Tua, and like this was bound to happen for him. And maybe now, look, he's played pretty well with the Dolphins over the last year and a quarter, basically. I mean, maybe he tries to get another starting job, and maybe this similar situation with the Dolphins, or maybe it's just a full right starting job. I mean, I don't really know if he's going to do that, but I feel like, look, he played well enough where he can sit back in the offseason, free agency, be like, I can start, and I could do a pretty good job at it. And maybe he goes to a team like, I don't know, like what the Saints did with Teddy Bridgewater, basically, where great QB. And if that QB goes down for 5 games, he could come in and still win some games and, you know, keep the train moving, maybe for a really good team like the Chiefs or Baltimore, or maybe even the Saints. I mean, I don't know.
I need to step in here too. If we're going to talk Saints with the Saints background right now, Drew Brees should not be starting NFL games right now. I just need to say that. And I know you're going to have a rebuttal to this, but every time I watch Drew Brees in that offense with those weapons, I look and watch that Saints offense and think this team would be better off with Jameis Winston, honestly. And I'm a Jameis believer. I'm a Jameis stan through and through. And listen, you look at the numbers last year. Yeah, Jameis turned the ball over a ton, but there was a reason Jameis led the league in passing yards last year. He was a touchdown machine. He made big plays. I would give Jameis a shot in that offense because, to me, Drew Brees looks finished. He looks absolutely finished. And as Kelly writes in the chat, he threw 30 interceptions last year. Yeah, I know he threw 30 interceptions, but Bruce Arians' offense is a high turnover offense. There's no other way to put it. I mean, look at what it did for Carson Palmer's career. Even though that Carson Palmer was turning the ball over in Arizona, he was making a lot of big plays in that offense. And Jameis obviously did the same last year. Yeah, he turned the ball over a ton. It was a pick-six machine, but he also makes a lot of plays with his arms. And I think in Sean Payton's offense, Jameis Winston is a better fit because Drew Brees' right arm looks like a noodle right now. It really does. And I love Drew Brees to death. I think he's a top 10 quarterback of all time, but they should either have kept Teddy Bridgewater and made him the future of this franchise, or they got to go to the Jameis route.
Okay, so this is nothing against Jameis Winston because I really like Jameis Winston too. I hope he becomes a starter in the future after Breeze, after this year or whenever Breeze retires. And I think I do agree with the Sean Payton offense. He could come in. I think with a West Coast offense, he's going to throw less picks. He's going to be more efficient. But right now, the Saints are scoring over 30 points a game, 30.6 points a game. With Drew Brees at the helm, that's more than Kansas City, Baltimore, Buffalo, with Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. That's also without Michael Thomas for the Saints. And it may not look pretty at times. And look, I was sitting there with that Monday night game, be like in the first half when Breeze didn't look so hot, I was like, it looked like the end. But then the 2-minute drill sets in, goes right back to Emmanuel Sanders, scores a touchdown, has a great second half. Saints ends up winning the game. And look, I think that Saints offense is, I think, still fun.
Imagine this offense with a guy who could throw the ball downfield. Honestly,
I don't think they have the weapons to throw the ball downfield. Michael Thomas isn't a huge downfield receiver. Alvin Kamara out of the backfield. Jared Cook's over the middle. They don't really have anyone that could really go.
I don't know, but I listen. I kind of disagree with that to an extent because I do think and listen. You watch more Saints football than I do, so yeah. I am not the expert here. I will admit that first, but I see guys in Alvin Kamara who's probably the quickest back in the league, honestly. And I see a guy who has a lot of potential to make big plays if put in that situation. I look at Michael Thomas. I see one of the best route runners in the NFL, but I also see a guy who can burn it in open space. I mean, like there's a guy. There's a reason this guy is so good because when he gets the ball, he makes a ton of plays with his legs. I think that guy could be a deep ball route runner. Emmanuel Sanders, another guy who's quick. And I know he's been in offenses in the past where he's not really asked to do a ton in terms of making big plays, aka when he was with Peyton Manning. But if this team can have a playmaker who can throw the ball downfield, I think Traquan Smith is a deep ball threat as well. I think Jared Cook is a guy who we've seen, even though he's not the fastest tool in the shed, but he's a guy who can make big plays downfield. He's a playmaker. Yeah, he's a playmaker. Exactly. So I think this offense is legitimately an offense with the weapons they have. Like, their ceiling is what the Packers are right now, honestly. I think with the way that they can make plays.
I would say they're not too far behind the Packers. I mean, even in that game that they lost.
Is a quarterback.
I don't think so, because even in the game they lost against the Packers, you have really the reason the Saints lost that game was because Aaron Rodgers completely killed the Saints secondary with the play action. And the only reason the Saints really faltered on offense was because Taysom Hill fumbled, which Taysom Hill's a whole number situation. We won't get it in today, obviously. But
what are your thoughts on Taysom Hill? I'm curious now because the way you said that, I'm so sick of Taysom Hill, honestly.
I'm not sick of Taysom Hill. I just think that he could be used much. I think he's more of just like a tight end player. I don't think he's I'd rather have Jameis if I'm the Saints because I think Jameis has a ton of potential. I completely agree with you, but Breeze is a lot better.
If Sean Payton put Taysom Hill in at quarterback,
it may happen. He's a love affair for him.
As a long-term answer over Jameis Winston, he should be fired on the spot. That is horrendous personnel usage right there. Horrendous. And I don't think they would do that, honestly. Like, I know they're in love with Taysom Hill, and we've seen that.
No.
But I honestly thought Jameis Winston was the most underrated quarterback in the NFL last year. Even with, like, as much as he turned the ball over. Like, you see so many throws that dude makes and be like,
I think he's
like, I don't think many guys can make that throw. Like, I don't think many guys, like, he has his issues and he has the turnover problems, but I think it's a lot less in a Sean Payton offense, personally. And that's nothing against Bruce Arians. I love Bruce Arians, but his offense is made to create turnovers too, on as much as it creates big plays. Mm-hmm. But I would give Jameis a shot because I'm just saying, like, I know this offense has been fine as it is, but I wonder about this team playing from behind against good teams. Not against the Chargers. Yes, it was impressive what they did, but this team playing from behind against good teams, they're going to eat up way too much clock because all they do is throw the ball underneath to Kamara and Sanders and Traquan Smith and all these guys when they need a guy who can make big plays. And I think Jameis Winston is that guy.
I mean, I understand it, but I don't know. I feel like this offense, first of all, they're not really 100%. I mean, I think they could play from behind, but when you have Kamara, you have Latavius Murray running the ball. I think, look, those two guys, I think, are one of the best running back duos in the league. And also, these first 5 games were without Michael Thomas. So when you have arguably the best receiver in the game, he's not even in the offense right now. Breeze was able to kind of get a connection with Traquan Smith and Emmanuel Sanders. And again, I feel like, look, right now, I'll stop the Saints talk, but I feel like this team will be just fine. I know they're 3-2, and they definitely have a lot of work to do, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But when you're scoring over 30 points a game, again, I don't think you could take out your quarterback. That's just my opinion. And probably moving over to a lot of worse teams here with the NFC East. We got the Giants and Eagles, which is a battle of one-win teams, but both these teams are one game or less out of the division lead here in the NFC East. The Giants did get their first win against the Washington football team, but they still look very, very shaky. And again, the Eagles hit with the injury bug with Carson Wentz. And again, what happened with Dak Prescott, definitely prayers up to him. And hopefully he gets better as soon as possible. But the Cowboys now riding with Andy Dalton. It's really just almost a mess there. I mean, I don't know. I feel like really overall, my feelings about this NFC East is they're just kind of stealing a playoff spot from a really strong NFC in my mind.
I mean, this division has a combined 5 wins, and we're in week 7. That's painful. That's painful to look at. I mean, the Steelers and Titans are playing. It's this week, I believe, and both teams have 5 wins in total. That's just to put in perspective how bad this division is right now. And we have Eagles-Giants tomorrow night in a matchup where the winner is going to be in first place in the division, and both teams have 1 win right now, and we're in week 7. That's a joke. That's like a legitimate joke. Like you don't see that. I mean, and like these teams are so bad, man. Like I can't believe the Giants found a way to win last week. The Washington football team starting Kyle Allen, who is terrible. Let's just be honest. I think he's one of the worst quarterbacks I've ever seen.
What they're doing with Dwayne Haskins, I think.
Criminal. Oh my God. You know what? Let's go there for a second because now I'm a little riled up. What the Washington football team is doing with Dwayne Haskins is worse than what the Jets are managing to do with Sam Darnold. And I mean that completely. And Sam Darnold has the worst coach in the history of professional sports as his head coach right now. And the Washington football team is still managing to do worse. How is that possible? I mean, they've basically benched him. They've completely disregarded him from the offense. He didn't even suit up last week. And I don't think he's suited up the last 2 weeks. I mean, this is terrible. And instead, they're going with guys with Alex Smith, who Alex Smith is a terrific story. I love the determination of Alex Smith. The E60 on him is a must watch. It's a gruesome watch, but it's a must watch. And what he's overcome is incredible. But the fact that they're choosing to roll with Alex Smith, who barely has a leg right now, and that, again, this is nothing against Alex Smith, but the fact that they're choosing this guy who's not a future for this franchise, and Kyle Allen, who sucked last year in Carolina, over a guy named Dwayne Haskins, who you drafted in the first round 2 years ago, and was a guy who's supposed to be the future of this franchise, especially when he came in last year and was actually all right. It's a joke. It's a real joke. I can't believe it. Yeah. I can, because it's Washington, and they are just the definition of incompetence. But
I can believe it. I mean, you got Dan Schneider as the owner. I mean, I completely believe it. And look, they're only 1 game out of the division lead.
Yeah, and that's how bad this
crazy.
is. That's how bad this division is. I mean, listen, if the Eagles don't win this division, they should fire the entire coaching staff. I could not be more serious about that. You look around this division, you should clearly have the best quarterback in Carson Wentz right now. And he hasn't been great by all means, but without Dak Prescott, he's still the best quarterback in this division by default, essentially. You have pretty decent, I'm not saying weapons around him, but you have Miles Sanders, who I think is probably the most underrated running back in the game right now. You have Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert, which might be the best tight end tandem in the league. And listen, outside of that, you got injuries all over the place. But this is still, like, you look at the roster, they're still clearly the most talented team in this division.
Yeah, I mean, they're the best team right now. And I think they'll probably end up like 8-8, 7-9, or I think they have a tie. So 8-7-1, whatever it ends up being. And that will probably get it done. But I mean, to me, it's just criminal because, I mean, as you were saying, I mean, now you're going to look around the NFC, which I think all of the other divisions are pretty solid. And now one of those teams are going to miss out on a playoff spot to a team that maybe under 500. I mean, it's crazy.
It's terrible. It's really terrible. I mean, oh, man.
It's bad.
I mean, like, you might as well just stack these teams along with the Vikings and just put them in football purgatory for the rest of the year and say, you guys can play each other, but just get him out of the league. Put the Jets with him too, honestly. Like, funnel all these terrible teams out of the league for this year, and just say they don't belong. And it mostly belongs to the NFC East, obviously, because of what they do. But I mean, how bad is Dallas too? Like, this is a team that
They're supposed to be good too.
Like, they were supposed to be, and obviously the stuff with Dak stinks.
Yeah,
like, that is terrible, and you can't predict that. But even before this, like, this team looked pretty terrible. Like, they come out every game and they're just giving away 21 points each game. The Zeke fumble issues are a serious problem going forward for me. And, I mean, we saw what happened on Monday night. I was a believer in Andy Dalton after what he did against the Giants, and he looked out – well, he came and looked like Andy Dalton, actually. That's probably the best way to put it. So
it shows you how bad the Giants are.
Good Lord, man. I mean, the Giants managed to make Andy Dalton look like a competent NFL quarterback for a few minutes there, but this is the worst. This Thursday night matchup is the worst matchup for two first place teams, like a team that
battling for first place,
going for first place I ever seen, and I don't think I'll ever see anything worse than it, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, just after this talk, we do have a comment from Salman Jets 718, and he asked, what if the Giants, or let's even say the Dolphins, get the first pick, and would they take Trevor Lawrence? Like, let's just talk about the Giants. Like, they're playing in the game for first place, and they're legitimate conversations that they could be in the conversation for the number 1 overall pick. I mean, I just think that's crazy.
I'm just gonna stop it right here. The Jets are going 0-16. The Jets are gonna end up with the first overall pick.
I agree with you.
Not a debate about it. You want to know something crazy? The Jets to go 0-16 right now are only plus 325 for that to happen, which is insane to me. You look at their schedule, like, they're playing all good teams. Like, they're playing all good teams. And Kelly, I'm seeing what you're saying in the chat about Trevor Lawrence. I saw a tweet the other day that basically said that Trevor Lawrence should consider his doctorate, like, just so he doesn't have to play for the New York Jets. And listen, he still has a full another year of eligibility too. Like, he should just take next year off, get his doctorate to the point where maybe the Jets aren't the worst team in the NFL, because you look forward, without Trevor Lawrence next year, the Jets are going to be the worst team in the NFL for the next 3 or 4 years. Honestly, like, I think you could realistically put the Jets there. I wouldn't blame him for a second. Wouldn't blame him.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a bad situation with the Jets. And honestly, like, I've never seen a team like, and I've seen in my sports watching, football watching, 2 0-16 teams, and this Jets team's the worst. This is the worst team I've ever seen. They're not even remotely in any games. And I know the Dolphins beat them 24-0, and the Dolphins, after coming off a great win against San Francisco, they could have played a lot better than they did, and they still beat the Jets by 24 points and shut them out. I just think it's crazy. I mean, really what's going on in New York and with these two football teams, I mean, it's definitely tough with these two teams. And again, I mean, I think we all got to laugh out of this segment as getting some steam off about two really bad teams, a bad division with the NFC East.
I can't laugh about it anymore.
As a Saints fan, I can laugh.
Yeah, you can. And you're lucky. We got. Let's just set the record straight. We got a Pats fan in Kelly here who has just seen Super Bowl after Super Bowl. We got Andrew who's got Drew Brees, and then you got me. Let's go down the miserable experience train here of sports fandom. Jets, who haven't been in the playoffs since 2010. You got the Orioles, who I've seen four winning seasons out of in my entire lifetime. The Rangers, who are the only team that of any competence that I've rooted for, and they've still given me more pain in my life than I think anything. And then you got the Knicks on top of all of this. Like, man. Then you got Kelly, who's seen 18 championships minimum. Which, oh my God, good Lord.
And I've only seen one, so
go to break before I start blabbering even more about my miserable life experience as a fan.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I'm going to say is that the Saints obviously started 1-2, and there was a lot of panic, I think, with like, oh, they're going to right the ship. And then you just turn on, New York sports radio, and it's talking about how bad the Jets are. So it always could be worse. I think that's something that at least us Saints fans always got to talk about, and Patriots fans. It could be a lot worse.
I don't know if it can get worse right now as a Jets fan. I really don't. This is arguably the worst football team in the history of the NFL. I mean, they're already in the triple-digit negative point differential already, and we're
really,
we haven't even played week 7 yet. We're not even halfway through the season, and their point differential is minus 100 right now, and it feels like minus 1,000. That's enough for me.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a fun segment. And after the break, we're going to talk about the NBA and the coaching carousel that continues to swirl. But we are going to take a quick break. You're listening to One on One Nightly. Welcome back into One on One Nightly. I'm Andrew Galata alongside Jackson Heil and Kelly Bright. And we're going to get into some NBA talk with the NBA coaching carousel. But first, just want to give a quick update on the World Series Game 2 between the Rays and Dodgers. Rays are up in that game 5-2 as they look to even the series at 1. But now going into the NBA, a lot of coaching news over the last few days. You had Ty Lue getting hired by the Clippers, Nate Bjorken getting hired by the Indiana Pacers, and then also just dropped today with Stan Van Gundy going to the Pelicans. And Kelly, look, I really like these 3 head coaching hires here. I think all pretty good fits, but to you, what's the best fit?
I agree with you. I do like all 3 of these choices. I think one that actually stood out to me, I don't know if it's necessarily the best fit, but what's most interesting to me is the Bjorken choice. Obviously he's coming off as an assistant for Nick Nurse, who I am a huge fan of. So I think that was a great choice, and that he's pretty much a disciple. He's been with him not only with the Raptors, but he also coached under him in the G League, which is kind of where he grew up as a coach. So I think he started in the D League in 2007. And he's been coaching with Nick Nurse ever since then. At that point, he was making $500 a year, worked part-time as a gym teacher, and now he's about to be an NBA head coach. And if you can't tell, I love a good story, so I'm bought in on him. Also, if you think about what he did with the Raptors, I mean, they have had a good defense, which I think is something that Pacers need. And every interview that they've had with Bjorken so far about taking over this position, he keeps talking about how he wants to step up the pace. He wants to have more energy, more excitement. And that's exactly what the Pacers need and what they haven't had with Nate McMillan for the past 4 seasons, where they've experienced 3 first-round sweeps. So I think this is going to be a big change for this organization.
Honestly, I didn't love the Nate McMillan firing, to be honest, just because I think he's a really good coach. And I'm not saying that they went the wrong direction here, because I think Bjorken is a really good hire, actually, with what they had to choose with. I'm entirely with you on Nick Nurse. I think he's a top 2, maybe top 3 coach in the NBA right now. I mean, he's right there with Eric Spoelstra and Brad Stevens for me. But I think Nate McMillan gets a bad rap for what he did in Indiana because, listen, what really did he have to work with? I mean, the Pacers have been screwed, honestly. Like they're in the wrong time in the Eastern Conference because yes, they've done what they could with what they've had, I would say. And obviously, like when Oladipo was healthy and stuff, yes, the ceiling was higher. But last year, really, what was their ceiling, to be honest, without a healthy Victor Oladipo? I mean, yes, I love Domantas Sabonis. I loved him coming out of Gonzaga, and I think he's going to be a terrific stretch player going forward. But I think Nate McMillan really made the most of the talent that was in Indiana, to be quite honest with you, because I look at that roster and, yeah, I see some talent, but I don't see a whole lot. And I thought Nate McMillan did a pretty good job because, listen, the Indiana Pacers got stuck every year somehow playing LeBron James. It didn't matter where they finished. They always ended up playing LeBron James in the first round in some capacity. I don't know how it happened, but it was like they were attached to each other. And yeah, LeBron's not losing in the first round. He never has in his career and never will. And that was unfortunate for him, I think, which is why I think he gets a bad rap. But shifting over to that hire, I agree with you. I do really like the hire because any Nick Nurse prodigy, I think, is going to bring that same type of energy that he brings to the table every single night. And he was a difference maker for the Raptors. Yeah, we can talk about Kawhi, which he was a difference maker and was the reason they won that title. But the shift from Drew Casey to Nick Nurse was 1A and 1B for me in terms of the reason the Raptors ended up going so far. And getting rid of DeMar DeRozan was on top of that. But I like this hire. I think if you're getting anything close to what Nick Nurse is, this hire is a complete win for Indiana.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like with what they're trying to do, I feel like having all that energy that what Bjorken brings, we're hoping at least because Nick Nurse, I feel like in today's NBA, you need someone like that. And especially if you're going to attract, I think, free agents or, things like that. I feel like building that type of culture is something that is really applicable in today's NBA. And I really just feel like it's a very Pacers hire. I mean, obviously, I don't know if they're ever going to be able to get that big star. I mean, maybe they will, obviously, Victor Oladipo and what they're doing. They definitely have a good core. But I feel like right now they're a team that, look, I know they did face, like as you were saying, face LeBron James every year, but they never challenged him. And they're a team that right now they're not challenging for a championship. So why not bring kind of a coach that maybe a change of tide really helps them kind of build a future so they could win an NBA title.
But who is realistically challenging LeBron James in the first round? And they did take him to 7 one year. They were very close to beating him the last year he went to the finals with Cleveland. They did take him to 7, which I think is almost as good as a win for me because LeBron James doesn't lose in the first round. He hasn't in his career, and I don't think he ever will. But I guess they did need a change, and sometimes that happens. I mean, like I said, this is the same route that the Raptors ended up going with Drew Casey. Dwayne Casey. I said
Dwayne Casey. Yeah.
I'm thinking of FUV alum Drew Casey, unfortunately, but who's terrific in his own right. But anyways, Dwayne Casey, apologies for that. That was the route that the Raptors went, and it ended up working out for them. So I won't criticize it completely until I see what happens, but I do think Nate McMillan is going to have success somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like right now my favorite hire out of these three, and I don't know if this is kind of underrated, but I feel like Ty Lue going to the Clippers is something that I'm really interested to see because obviously the Clippers underperformed with a ton of star power. And with Ty Lue, his only success really here as a head coach in the NBA was with LeBron James with a ton of star power. I feel like he's a player's coach. He's really good, I think, at handling stars, handling kind of their mantras, handling their personalities. And I feel like, not like Doc Rivers, I feel like he's a type of coach where it's kind of his way, it's going to be his system, and not all stars can deal with that, especially when you have so much star power. Bringing a guy like Ty Lue, I feel like definitely more of a player's coach, listening to the players. I feel like that's something going into next year. I feel like they can really challenge LeBron and the Lakers.
Yeah, I agree with that, but just kind of like what Jackson said about Nate McMillan fire. I don't know if the Clippers' failure in the playoffs last year was all on Doc Rivers. I mean, Paul George struggled, Patrick Beverley struggled. You had Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell who had been solid off the bench all year, and all of a sudden they were nowhere to be found. So I don't know if it was all coaching, but at the same time, I agree. if you're going to have a coach come in to handle a team with the star power that they have, especially with Kawhi, who there were some reports that there was some tension there with how he was managed throughout the season. So you do have Ty Lue coming in as someone who has dealt with, these huge stars, this kind of all-star like team. So, I mean, this year coming up is going to be a championship or bust type year for the Clippers already. So he's got high expectations, and it's going to be tough coming into that role, but I think it's a good challenge for him.
I'll be honest. I didn't like Doc Rivers. I don't like Ty Lue either. To be completely honest with you guys, I think Ty Lue was a product. Winning the championship was obviously a product of LeBron James and Kyrie Irving, and we saw in the years after where I think the biggest problem with the Clippers last year and the problem under Doc Rivers was that this was a team that failed to make in-game adjustments frequently. And I mean, just look at games 5, 6, and 7 against the Nuggets where they blow double-digit leads in each one of those games with a chance to close out the series, and they end up getting smoked. Ty Lue was very similar to me than with Doc Rivers, honestly. I mean, this was a team when he was in Cleveland, it seemed like LeBron James was running the show, and Ty Lue didn't have a whole lot to do with any of the success, in my opinion. And that's kind of been the way for most of LeBron James's career, really, other than Eric Spoelstra and Frank Vogel, to be quite honest with you. So I am not a huge believer in Ty Lue. I'm not a huge believer in the Clippers, to be honest. I think with Doc Rivers or not, those guys are a pack of frauds, honestly. The way that they showed up in the postseason and the way they carried themselves, like they've accomplished everything when they hadn't accomplished anything together, was a disgrace, to be quite honest with you. And there is not a bigger fraud in the NBA than Paul George. And the way that dude carries himself just bothers me. It really bothers me, because you go to the post-game comments after Game 7 where he does nothing all game. He shoots like 4 of 16 from the field. He's shooting the ball off the side of the backboard when he's got a wide open 3 in the corner. And his comments after the game are like, yeah, this wasn't a championship season or bust for us. Like, what? What are you talking about? Like, you basically are in a situation where you just built everything for this season to be a championship season. And especially when Kawhi has the opportunity to opt out after next year, Paul George also has the opportunity to opt out. People are going to be making money soon. And with what you gave up to get Paul George there, that was a championship or bust season. So was next year. And if they stay for 2 more years after that, those are championship or bust seasons as well. So the whole Clippers organization is just, it frustrates me. It really does, because they should be so much better than they are, and they just consistently flop year in and year out.
I just feel like the one thing that you kept going back to was kind of these players' mantra, their attitudes, I just feel like it wasn't handled well under Doc Rivers. And I feel like Ty Lue, he's done it before. And as much as you want to say,
fair point.
With, I obviously LeBron James made that championship, Kyrie Irving made that championship happen, but someone's got to manage all of them. Someone's got to manage the heads. I know everyone goes back to kind of those kind of different sport, but the Yankees, when they were so good, winning 4 straight championships back in the late 90s, and everyone says, oh, all Joe Torre had to do was put Derek Jeter at shortstop or whatever. But it's more than that. It's being able to manage. It's being able to kind of deal with stars' attitudes, which I don't care how great an attitude you are. If you're that good of a player, like a LeBron James, like a Kawhi Leonard, you're going to have some sort of like, I'm the best. And sometimes it's going to be, give me the ball. And sometimes you just need someone to be like, calm down, like, we got this, and just kind of manage. I feel like, and that's something that Ty Lue can do.
Yeah, talking about managing stars, let's talk about managing young stars with the Stan Van Gundy hire, going to the Pels. I think that's a very interesting move, and I'm really interested to hear your take, because I can see both arguments for this, because you have Stan Van Gundy, who's a pretty old, I mean, he's been out of the game for a few years now, but he's a very old-fashioned coach. He's very, I don't know if he's not much of a player's coach, and he's going on this team with Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart, a bunch of young, talented guys. So I could see the argument against this decision, in that, is he not going to gel well with his players? Is he not going to bring out the best of this young talents? Like, are you going to have the success he had with Dwight Howard in Orlando, or are you going to have him in Detroit with Andre Drummond? So I think it could really go either way.
I think it's an interesting point, and I memean, we've seen how negative I've been on this show today. It would be fitting for me to take the negative route here, which I am. I don't know. This is a hire that just doesn't move the needle for me for New Orleans. And I thought there were options out there that really could have moved the needle. And I think I look at all these jobs, other than really the Clippers, but I'm not even really going to include that in there because the Clippers, I feel like we're going internally regardless of what happened. But I think New Orleans was probably the most attractive option for a head coach opening this offseason. I mean, you got Zion Williamson, obviously, who's going to be a superstar. You have arguably the most underrated guard in the league in Drew Holiday. You got a foundation there that you can build around. I didn't even mention Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, yada, yada. Like the list goes on in terms of talent there. And they got a guy in Stan Van Gundy who, yes, we can talk about the success he had with Dwight Howard, but that didn't end well in Orlando with him and Dwight. And there were a lot of people that said Dwight Howard got Stan Van Gundy fired, which tells me essentially if that was the case, then he's not a guy who really commands a ton of respect in the locker room. Then you got what happened in Detroit, which is a whole nother disaster in itself. The only thing I will say about Stan Van Gundy, which I like the direction of this, is that Stan Van Gundy has had success with big men. He has in his career, and he was part of the development of Dwight Howard. We could say all we want about Andre Drummond, but Andre Drummond had the best years of his career under Stan Van Gundy. Can he do that with Zion Williamson? Probably. But I also think Zion's going to have a lot of success with really whoever you put in there. So that's where I kind of struggle with this hire because I don't really feel like it moves the needle. I thought that they were perfectly fine with what they had there. And that's why I don't love the hire. But I do see the argument for it, like you mentioned, Kelly, with him having success with big men in the past. And like we said, he did take the Magic to the finals too. So there is a track record there of success. So it's not my favorite hire, but it's not one that I am writing off as the worst so far because I do think there are worse hires out there.
For me, I feel like if you want to win a championship, which is every team's goal, I don't think that Stan Van Gundy will be winning the Pelicans a championship. So in that, sense, it's a failure or not a good hire. But in the other sense, I feel like he's going to build a culture. And yes, I wouldn't say a player's coach. I think a lot of people, you wouldn't say that, but he's a guy that's going to mold these players in to play the right mold of basketball, to play the kind of right style of basketball. Because when you have young stars, and it doesn't matter how much talent he has, you could ask the Knicks, like a team with no theme, no mold, no kind of style. You could have a lot of young stars, but it's not good enough to win. So I feel like, I think a few hires this year, I feel like Tom Thibodeau is the same way with the Knicks. I feel like they're not going to be championship winning hires, but I feel like that you're going to be able to build something, and it kind of sets up for that next coach where you can actually build something really great and really special. I think it's similar to what the Warriors did with Mark Jackson. They really built a really good core, and then they switched it up with Steve Kerr. I feel like that's something that could really happen with the Pelicans here and as much young talent that they have.
I think the Mark Jackson route would have been interesting for any team because I am not a Mark Jackson guy, to be quite honest with you. I think what he did in Golden State, if he did anything Golden State, it was deter what they were trying to do. And Steve Kerr was such a different type of coach. We could talk about building the culture there all we want, but that culture was built by the players, not the coach, in my opinion. I think Steve Kerr actually changed the culture a little bit there, where it was so much more of a free-flowing offense, and that kind of created a free-flowing culture as well for me in Golden State, which ended up winning them 3 titles. So that was I was hoping no one would go the Mark Jackson route. I was really curious if the Knicks were going to go that route because that would have sent me off the ledge in multiple regards, and it would have been a disaster to see me there. And I'm not even a huge fan of the Thibodeau hire, but it's not Mark Jackson, so I can live with it.
Yeah, one guy I've actually been interested throughout this whole coaching carousel is Mike D'Antoni, who I actually think has a chance of going to the Nets now because I originally thought the 76ers were going to take him, and then they obviously went with Doc Rivers. But you think about it, D'Antoni, I know he's now older, but he was Nash's head coach with the Suns, and obviously Nash getting his first head coaching opportunity there. It'd be a great person for him to kind of bounce ideas off of, have a mentor to kind of show him the ropes, especially being in that new position. And, D'Antoni, he's considered a pioneer for changing the NBA. He kind of changing them into the 3-point shooting offenses that they have now, the pace and space kind of league. He kind of developed that when he was with the Suns. So, and he's worked with Durant and Irving on Team USA. I think he could be a really good fit there. So I think that'd be a really cool hire there if that happens. Obviously, too soon to tell, but I wouldn't be surprised if we hear about that in the next few weeks.
That'd be pretty interesting, I feel, because especially with Nash being a new head coach, bringing a guy that's done it for, I feel, forever. I mean, again, I feel like D'Antoni with playing absolutely no defense is definitely something that is worrisome, but I feel like as him as like an assistant, definitely building an offense with Kevin Durant, with guys like Kyrie Irving, I mean, that could definitely be interesting. And I mean, I could see that fit there. And again, I feel like that's something that for the Nets, that could build some success for them.
Yeah, I don't think he's a head coach at this point anymore, but I do
I
think
agree.
that he's a good guy for Steve Nash to have as just like a reference point, even for not only just things tactically in terms of like what you're doing possession to possession, but just a guy who's been there before and has had a lot of experience as an NBA head coach and has been through a lot. Another guy that I was curious to see if anyone took a flyer on was Jason Kidd too, because that's a guy who obviously started off in Brooklyn. First few years there were solid, and then he wanted more control of the organization than they were willing to give on, and he just shipped off to Milwaukee, where I don't think he was all that terrible, but again, Mike Budenholzer took them to the next step. Now he's an assistant. He's now got a full year under Frank Vogel, who I think is the most underrated coach in the NBA. I would wonder if anyone would take a flyer on him, even with all the bad ilk that has surrounded him since becoming a head coach. Because honestly, I look at Jason Kidd and I saw one of the smartest point guards that has ever lived in the NBA, and a guy who maybe had an ego problem coming into the head coaching sphere. And has he learned from that? I'm not sure, but I wonder if anyone would have been willing to take a flyer on him, and especially maybe even a team like Houston, where you have so many stars, you have two of the premier point guards in the NBA, where I think he would have been a great fit coaching James Harden and Russell Westbrook. I listen, I don't know if the problems are fixed, and I think that's really up for debate at this point, but I was curious to see if anyone would take a flyer on him, and no one has yet. But I think he is a head coach in the future, whether it's this year in some capacity or within the next few years. I think that guy's going to have another head coaching job, and I'm curious to see where he ends up.
Yeah, I give him 1 more year as an assistant, and I think he'll be a head coach.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a guy like you would think it would work for him. Players coach, definitely knows what he's doing. One of the best point guards, as you were saying, of all time. So I don't know. I think it's a little puzzling, but maybe he just needed some time as an assistant to kind of learn coaching, learn how to handle a locker room, kind of learn that stuff. And again, I could maybe see him next year, as you were saying, maybe 1 more year would really help him. And then maybe some team with a ton of stars next year says it's time to go and, get a championship. But I think with all that said, it is time to wrap up the show. It's been great talking with you guys. And again, I feel like we got the World Series going on, talked a really cool conversation about football, finishing off with basketball. Definitely
Cool's a way to put that conversation. That is
cool for me.
That is a very subjective term. I mean, depressing, painful.
Oh, I enjoyed it.
For you guys,
2 out of 3
you get to sit and watch me in misery. That's obviously always a good time. I enjoy watching people in pain sometimes when they have to go through sporting failures like I've had to go through my entire life.
Hey, I'm watching Mookie Betts
show.
have the series of his life, and he was on my team a year ago. So
you saw him win a championship. Yeah, you saw him win a championship. Oh man, don't even get me started with stars leaving. I'll go with Manny Machado, Carmelo, all these guys. See ya. Like, it's just like everyone leaves, and the ones that my teams do keep, aka Chris Davis, just end up putting up historically terrible numbers. So enough with my depression. I brought it upon myself. That was on me. I really did bring that upon myself. I don't know why I did that, but great show.
Great show. For Kelly Bright, Jackson Heil, I'm Andrew Galato. We'll see you guys soon.